You're listening to the Primal Happiness Show, a podcast dedicated to helping you thrive in this crazy modern world. Every Tuesday, we explore the nature of how our minds really work, what exactly the human animal requires to thrive, and how we can live happier and more fulfilling lives. If you're new here and haven't yet taken our free class, then there's no better place to get a jump start on reclaiming your primal happiness. It's where we'll guide you step by step through our antidote to today's modern world. Simply head on over to primalhappiness.co/antidote to get the free class and discover how to thrive without having to move to a planet that's not so crazy as ours. But now, your host, Leanne Brooke-Tyler.
Hello, my beautiful people. A huge warm welcome back to the show. Men and women in this crazy modern world are living shallow, disconnected, and unfulfilling lives. So we create the path for those who are ready to reclaim their wildness and actualize their deepest gift. The next crucible we'll be opening is Waking the Wild Sovereign in June, and it's already almost full. There is just one space left. So if you're feeling the call to sovereignty and to actualize your inner king or queen archetype, then do book your call with myself or Jonathan to explore if indeed it is aligned for you. And you can do that at primalhappiness.co/WTWS. We don't have any other offerings right now for you to join us in walking the path of Waking the Wild. But if you want to be the first to hear of the next opening, do make sure you're in our Facebook group at facebook.com/group/primalhappiness and subscribe to our Moonly newsletter at primalhappiness.co/moonly. And now onto this week's show for Damien Bohler. Damien is the founder and current director of Evolutionary Relating, an educational platform dedicated to transforming culture through evolving the way we relate to ourselves, to each other, to vocation and purpose, and the natural world. In its core, he's an investigator. He's deeply fascinated by the way things work in this human realm. His interests span the exploration of intimacy, love, sexuality, attachment, polarity, human design, and much, much more. His gift is in the ability to synthesize, articulate, and transmit dense and disparate information, and delights in doing so through the mediums of writing, facilitating, teaching, and coaching. As you can probably tell, Damien brings a lot of breadth and a lot of depth. And in this conversation, we really went deep. Damien and I explored the possibility of using the portal of intimacy to create the more beautiful world our hearts know is possible, in the words of Charles Eisenstein. We spoke about why we're so obsessed with relationships in our modern culture, the wounds that keep us from experiencing what we most desire, how healing those wounds opens us to create a more connected, loving world. I absolutely adored recording this episode. I think you are going to love it. Let's dive in. Hello, Damien. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. I already know from it's actually been quite a long chat we've been having. It's been like one of those ones where I'm like, we've got to stop talking and hit record because we're just missing all the gold that's already happening. So yeah, it really is my pleasure. There's been so many elements of the conversation we've just had that I'm just like, oh, can't wait to dive into those. So yeah, this is going to be a really juicy episode. I can feel it. So the conversation we're just in, I'm going to kind of like tease us back into it because it was just delightful. And I know it's something the listeners of the show are going to love. What has brought you to intimacy being your passion, your work, something I know that you write and teach about a lot? What's brought you there?
So I'm going to kind of I want to answer that by going forward a little bit into the future and then back a little bit into my backstory to get to that.
Oh, it's all good with time travel on this show.
Great. We'll do a bit of time travel here. So my actual greatest fascination is with the evolution. I feel just pulled by the evolutionary impulse, the kind of the evolution of consciousness or spirit or humanity or whatever we want to call it. Feels like it's calling me, and I love exploring developmental psychology and developmental frameworks and kind of getting a sense of where we're heading as humanity. And that's kind of a framework, because I really believe that intimacy, or understanding and getting really good at relating in relationships, is a key towards moving into those places, for reasons I'm sure we'll go into in the show. And the backstory is, my undergrad degree, it was in environmental biology and in ecology. I kind of like specialized in ecology. I worked as a science teacher for a period of time. I studied permaculture and worked as a permaculture designer, and I used to teach permaculture design certificates. And I actually recognized that I realized this quite a long time ago, but I realized that like the state of the world and the place that we're in, we're not actually going to be able to change it until we actually care about and love each other. It's like we can do as much environmental activism as we want, but until people actually have enough space in themselves to care about the world, they're not going to do anything. And I think one of the biggest stresses that we have, and one of the biggest energy and time sucks that exist, is our orientation to romantic relationship. Sex and love preoccupies most of us. It's in all our media, it's in all our music, it's all the movies, it's all the TV shows, it's all like there's an obsession with it, and a lot of people are struggling with it. There's a lot of pain. There's a lot of discomfort. There's relationships that are constantly in conflict. There are single people wanting it. There are people trying to get out of a relationship, and it's consuming a lot of attention. So it's like, I realize that that's a leverage point. It's like, if we can start to figure that out, because a lot of people I know really want like more divine relationships. They want more divine union relationship. If we can start to figure that out, then we can actually start to unlock this developmental process that I feel like we're being pulled through.
Oh, I love that so much. Yeah. Yeah. I've never heard it described in that way, as a kind of leverage point. Everything you said makes complete sense to me. But yeah, it's so clear. So why do we have this obsession? Because it seems to me it's not to say that this doesn't show up, in myth, ancient culture. Of course it does. I do think, though, it's a particularly modern obsession in the way that you've just described it. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think there's a number of reasons. And I think one of the major ones that we're struggling with, particular our generation and perhaps the generation or two after me, the newest generations that are coming through are going to have an entirely different problem. I can already see it emerging. But one of the big things and one of the big, hot topics that exist right now is around attachment theory. And I think insecure attachment is a fairly recent phenomena. It's like, a few generations before of us as well. But it's like we've deviated with the Industrial Revolution so far from natural kind of child rearing ways of being. And so we're all kind of growing up with this traumatized, insecure nervous system that doesn't know how to bond. And really, insecure attachment, as I understand it, is an incomplete bonding process with the mother or the primary caregivers. We weren't able to properly bond and separate from that bond. But if you look at indigenous cultures, they have ritual around how they separate and differentiate from the mother, and and they have the tribe and the village taking care of them, and we don't have that anymore.
Well, and the attachment in the first place. It's like both are missed. That's the tragedy, really, of our modern culture. It's like the attachment isn't, the secure attachment isn't even in there in the first place. And there aren't the rituals in place to create that clear sense of, and now you are going into the world as a man or as a woman. It's both we're bereft of both. Which, it's so obvious that has led to where we are. But I think it's not often articulated in this clearer way, that it's like, no wonder relationships are as they are, given that.
Yeah, because we haven't actually developed a proper understanding of how to bond in a way that's sustainable. So we don't know how to do it. And so we get into a relationship, and we basically, the first thing we do is project all our unhealed attachment wounds onto our partner. Well, after the honeymoon period. And then we're in a constant dysregulation state and trying to both turn them into the parent so that we can resolve that attachment problems with the parent while they're doing it to us. And then we're just in this kind of grindy friction of a relationship that's really challenging. One of the first time I really went viral on Facebook, I wrote a post that I just got really kind of worked up about this topic. And I wrote a post called A Culture of Love Addiction. And that got shared a whole bunch of times. And I was like, whoa, people are listening to what I write. And it was really a criticism on, and I think that, as reflection, I think that comes down to the fact that we haven't bonded properly. So we're obsessed and we're infatuated with the idea of the relationship, which is kind of like the attempts to repair that bond that we didn't get properly.
Yes, I love that.
That's almost like the first thing that we need to do when we start looking at how can we have evolutionary intimacy is how do I first start repairing my ability to bond properly with other humans, particularly a romantic partner.
Yeah. Before we started recording, you mentioned listening to that conversation I had with Steve James about the kind of shadow polarity, and that feels very linked to what you're just saying there. It's like the intention is so well intended. It's how do I create what it is that my heart longs for, but it's all happening over the top of that missing attachment.
Yeah. I mean, that's something that I've written about before, and I think about it as it's like heal your attachment wounds, and then polarity will emerge and be it would be an energy or a tool or a thing that we can use for beneficial purposes. Then we can actually have erotic polarity that does something for us versus consumes us, burns us up in the flame, and it's like if our attachment system isn't healed and we're still operating from an insecure attachment system, what happens is we end up having insecure polarity, and we end up in a polarity of anxious avoidant. And that's a polarity, right? The anxious and the avoidant is like a wounded masculine, wounded feminine polarity, and it plays out consistently in relationship. And then you're like, what is happening? Why am I always in a state? When I'm with my partner, I can't settle myself.
Yeah. So well said. Yes, it is and it is a polarity that does very much work like a polarity. It does create that sense of it kind of works on a level. And I don't know if you want to get into this slightly. I know it's not the purpose of this whole episode, but we were chatting about a post that I saw you write about the kind of there is benefits of those two attachment styles in a relationship. They do work as a polarity in themselves, but also allow us to get some of those needs met. So I don't know if you'd like to say a little bit about that.
Sure. So the interesting, I think about polarity, and polarity is one of the fundamental forces of our universe. You can't really get away from it. We have up and down, we've hot and cold. It exists across the board. And one of the fundamental polarities that we're grappling with is the polarity between agency and communion. It's a tension. So agency is autonomy, independence, freedom. We often consider this the masculine pole, right? And then communion is more like intimacy, connection, closeness. And we think about this as the feminine pole. And these two poles are in tension, in a dynamic tension between us. And if we go too far to one side or the other, we get a rupture. You go too far on the agentic side and there's no relationship. There's no need to be together. It's too much autonomy. You go too far into communion, you have enmeshment and codependence, which is what a lot of people struggle with. And so when we're looking at the benefits or the gifts of these anxious and avoidant, is they're actually pointing to the requirement to heal these agentic or communion-based aspects of being. So the anxious is a more communion-oriented being. Someone who's anxious attachment, whether they're a man or a woman, tend to orient towards wanting to create communion. They're wanting to create connection. They're actually playing the feminine pole in that dynamic, right? And it can be a man doing that. And it doesn't mean that you're a feminine man. I'm more on the anxious side. And when we start healing the polarity, I can play the masculine, even though some part of me is orienting towards communion. And you have the avoidant, which has the benefits of providing agency in the relationship. They provide the space, the slowing down, the freedom, the making sure that we don't get enmeshed, the making sure that we have enough space. So when we look at these two types of being, agentic and communion-based beings, we have the gifts. And those are the things that we actually need to heal. The anxious type needs the gifts of the avoidant to make sure they don't get enmeshed. And the avoidant needs the gifts of the anxious to make sure the relationship still functions. And so then we can start, and when we heal those dynamics, then we naturally start to repolarize to our orientation. The the man or the masculine person will naturally, whether he's anxious or not, will naturally start to become more masculine. And this is a very interesting thing to occur because I'm more anxious. My partner is more avoidant, right? And as we heal our attachment, she becomes more and more communion based, which is really disorienting for an avoidant attachment system, which is part of the healing process. And I become more and more agentically oriented, which is also disorienting for me. I'm like, oh, I want to prioritize my own space and my own time. And that actually creates a masculine feminine polarity, which is much more healthy.
I love that. And I was about to ask you a question, but I think you've just answered it. But I'm going to ask it anyway, just for clarity. So like your relationship, that's the same dynamic for me. So my attachment style has typically been more avoidant. And yet, and I think because of that, actually, it actually really took a long time for me to understand that my natural orientation is actually not just feminine, but like really feminine. And so that has been like as disorientating as anything I've ever experienced. So the question I was going to ask you was, do you see, and I think you already answered this in a negative, but I'd like to just double check this. So you were saying that the gifts of, say, for example, the anxious would be that one bringing that communion pole. Do you see that that no longer is true if it, for example, was a man who then naturally falls into more the masculine? He no longer is bringing the gift of communion. It's like it was a gift of the wound, but no longer is a gift once he inhabits the true masculine that he came here for.
That's a great question and a very interesting, and I want to take it in a slight tangent off of that and add another dimension or another axis to this conversation. And this is a developmental framework. So as we're actually becoming more and more integral beings or more and more integrated beings, part of healing our attachment is to actually integrate both sides of that inside of ourselves. Part of becoming a more holistic integrated human is actually to integrate our masculine, feminine, and then we're no longer identified. Like I no longer am identified as a subject, meaning that I am masculine but don't think about it. And this is what you'd see as traditional masculine. They wouldn't understand what masculine is. They just are masculine, right?
Yes.
We actually are able to see masculine, feminine as a phenomena and be able to choose. So you're saying you recognize you're a feminine being. Femininity has been something that you're allowing, I imagine, to be expressed more fully through you, recognizing that some part of you is actually all of it, right? And so I think as we start to heal, and I think particularly for, imagine listeners of this show and people who are naturally oriented towards spiritual pursuits and healing and all of this stuff, we're moving in a process of integration. And so when we get to that point, it's like, yes, I start to play out more of the masculine pole, but I also understand the dynamics of communion. So I still play with them in the relationship. And same with my partner. She also understands the dynamics of agency or autonomy. And so we're both doing it now. We're both making sure that the relationship is filled with those things. And then the masculine, feminine polarity can be played out through that, but also different expressions. You know, they can be played out in kind of dominant submission type expressions, or like leading following type expressions, or like there's lots of different ways that masculine feminine dynamics can play out. And so we kind of have access to all of that world, and we get to play and choose how we want to play them out rather than be fixed or rigid or this is how I have to be.
Yes. Oh, I love that. Yeah. Yes. Because it's not like communion and agency are like synonyms for masculine and feminine.
That's right.
It's an aspect.
They exist inside of us all the time.
Yes.
You know, both of those forces exist inside of us too. You know, and that's what keeps the body together, right? That's what keeps the body together and not falling apart, which is communion, right? And what keeps the body from not forming tumors and cancerous growths is agency, making sure the cells are separate from one another. So actually both forces are happening from the atomic to the cellular to the psychological through all layers of our being.
Beautiful. So coming back to the, I guess, like premise around we've got this modern obsession with relationship because of our sort of damaged attachment. Let's kind of pick that thread back up. So if we were now to see, like, what's the, and I think we've already started to enter this, like, why would we want to start to heal those attachment wounds? What starts to become available from that place?
Well, the first piece is that we start to be able to move out of friction-based relating or sympathetic, stress-dominant relationships. So this love addiction, or, if you look at movies and they're full of drama, right? And most songs, the top 100 pop songs on the radio, most of them are just like angst. They're just angst. And everyone is like heartbreaking. They're either over-exalted, like can't even think because they're so in love and infatuated, or suffering from heartbreak. And we just see this constantly, right? So when we heal our attachment wounds, we get out of that drama cycle. And people are like, but I don't want to give up the passion. It's like, no, actually the passion becomes deeper. It actually starts to become parasympathetic, which means that we can have like swellings or upwellings of love and erotic energy and everything that actually isn't based on friction. It's not based on conflict. It's not based on oh my God, this person might leave me at any given moment. It's actually, we're safe, we're secure, our nervous system settles, our body settles, and relationships have the potential to become a sanctity, somewhere where we actually evolve and grow and become more of who we should be and actually generate energy that we can then put to our own meaningful purpose in the world.
Oh, I love that. You reminded me, I'd forgotten this actually, a few years back, at some point, kind of like in the journey of healing those attachment wounds. I mean, I think to some extent it's kind of always ongoing, but there was a kind of enough of a liberation from that I had that exact insight. I can't remember if I was watching a film or listening to something, a song, and I was just like, it's just drama. Like, this is like, what are we doing? Like, why are we just consuming all of this drama now? And then I kind of like went through a phase where I almost like felt like I was like too good for it. It's just like, why would I want to consume this? And I feel like I've kind of like come to another place now where I can kind of like enjoy it on one level, but also recognize like there's so much more beyond that that's available. And I'd actually forgotten that I had that experience. It was a few years back, but yeah, that makes so much sense. So let's, I'd love
just one more comment before you go. So it's like this sanctity then becomes the grounding or the launch pad, like a lot of people like spiritually desires to grow and expand their spiritual, and like, what does that mean pragmatically, right? It's like, there's actually a deep potential spiritual experience for us, like profound spiritual experiences that are available to us, and ones that are available inside of relationship or inside of connection with others. And you have soulmate and twin flame and union and all of this stuff, sacred union and everything, Hyros, Gamos and everything. And like, what does that actually mean? Well, it means that we can actually experience profound spiritual states, which are expanded experiences of being from relationship, but you have to do that from a stable base, right? And so when we clear up our attachment wounds, we start to create a stable base, a sanctity, which is a launch pad for those possibilities, which I think so many people are deeply yearning for.
Yeah, beautiful. Funny enough, I was going to ask you a question that you basically just answered. So the mind reading is completely welcome. So we can now move on to the next question, which is, so from that, I think you described it as like a kind of launch base, like foundation. What does that allow us? Like, and I think this is where it really starts to link back to your realizations about if we want to create, and I think you said this before we started recording, the beautiful world our hearts know is possible, as Charles Eisenstein said. How does this link to that foundation that's created through that union, that sanctity? And I love that word, funny enough. I was reading a client's gene keys, and it's one of the gene keys is sanctity.
Yeah.
And it's not a word that we typically, it is. It's not a word that's used much, is it? And I actually was like, it didn't have like an immediate resonance, because it kind of means holy in a way, doesn't it? But it was, I hadn't quite, it was like, it wasn't quite grokking for me as having that meaning. And so it's interesting that you've used that.
Well, that's where I took it from, one of the cities in the gene key. Another city that I love there is sacrifice, because that's not one that we think about as being an enlightened or realized realized aspect of being, but I love it. Sanctity for me is a beautiful one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
So how does that link? What does that provide us with?
So, firstly, we cut out the drama, and then, we can stop on the planet. Like if we all started figuring out our relationships, we could stop spending so much time fixated on the drama in the world and almost obsessed to the point that we've got our blinders on as to what's actually going on the planet and all the problems that are becoming more and more prevalent. It's almost like when we're consumed by our relational drama, we can't even see that, or let alone put energy towards it. So we start to pull back that energy by stopping the drama, and then we start to generate the energy to go further. And like I said, I think I can't remember if I said this in the podcast or maybe before, but I think the next evolutionary steps we're heading towards are more collective or tribal or tribe 2.0. I sometimes like to call it turquoise in spiral dynamics. Or there is a belief in the human design. They also talk about, and in Gene Keys, the awakening of the solar plexus awareness, which is a deep empathy where we're actually going to be able to feel each other more deeply, not just orient from our mind, and all of that points towards that. I like to call it organismic consciousness, because it's kind of a fun play on words, that we're going to start orienting more deeply from collective orientation. And I like to think of this as so I'm going to add another element into this I like to say that I think the future is organismic, and the future is collectives of highly individuated beings. So we actually really differentiate. We become really uniquely ourselves. And from that, we learn how to be together. And the union or the couple or the relationship, it doesn't even necessarily need to be a couple. It could be other forms of relationship, triadic, 4-way, 5-way, whatever, man, woman, any combination you can imagine. But the romantic partnering is it's like a pillar. It's actually like a pillar, because that's the central pillar from which future generations can emerge, whether we're talking reproductively or not. But I really strongly feel that these partnerings, these partnerships become pillars or anchor points for communities or for tribes to start forming around. And so we start now having the potential to come together in that way. Something that's happened to me as I've really deepened in my relationship, I start noticing, and this is probably an experience for a lot of people, when you get in a couple relationship, suddenly we become more fascinated by hanging out with other couples. And that's a very interesting thing that happens there. And I've lately been, speaking more openly with other couples, and we share openly about our challenges and our difficulties that we have in relating and our growth experiences. And I can feel it's those kind of relationships that are starting to form the base of something further, and then it's then we have, it doesn't necessarily mean that everyone needs to be in a couple, or that if you can't be in a partnership, that means you don't evolve or anything like that. But they do seem like an important piece. And if we're still yearning or hungering for that kind of romantic connection with another, and there's obviously a very strong reason, it's such a strong pull in people, right? It's if you're single, most people, when we're single, it's that ache. How many people are listening this, feeling that ache, that yearning to be with somebody, right? Why is it that we have such a strong impulse for that? Right. And so there is something in that bonding process that allows us to create a stable anchor that I believe then will be the pillars or the foundations for Tribe 2.0, new communities to emerge, new ways of sharing resources and child rearing again in communities, That's what really excites me.
I love this so much. It's what you described has been a real topic of conversation in one of the groups for a course we run. And there was a couple of women in there that were really struggling, as probably all my clients who are mothers talk about. And it's trying to parent without the village. And it just seems, it's you can't, it will be a struggle. We're just not designed to do it without the village. But I don't think it is as, such a kind of doom-like prophecy as that might sound, because we do have the opportunity to create something else. And I'm not saying this is the only way to do it, or it looks exactly like this, but to an extent intentionally. I'm not saying it was I had the full vision, but there was definitely some vision here. both my parents are dead, and they weren't really local even when my children were very small. But so in short, we didn't really have that kind of family community around us. So very intentionally started to create that community with other couples who had children at the same time. And that has, the intention has kind of always, it's been almost kind of self-fulfilling, or it's created almost this like sort of sustainable thing where the deeper the bonds have grown, the more important we've realized it is. It's like, it's kind of like pulled us into this coherence where we're like, this is really important. I'm getting chills actually as I speak about it, because it's like become its own organism where it's like saying, this is required of you. And over the years now, so my oldest is 13. So we've been like this bonded community. We call ourselves the commune. Over those 13 years, we've become this like big family of maybe, I think there's 18 of us, including all the children and, you know, children of people have come in that weren't children of the original, you know, because there's been divorces, which have been really challenging for us, people moving out of the area. And yet it's just called more and more from us. Like, how do we now meet this? How do we make this work? And I now look and I think, oh my goodness, like we've done it. I can feel the emotion rising now. Like we're still doing it. Like we're creating that I didn't think was available. And yet it is. It's happening. And so I want to share that because it's been, again, really alive this week, that I can now say, like, it is possible. It isn't just a dream that we can create this. We can.
Absolutely. I agree, you know, and that's beautiful. I love hearing that. And I think that's what's calling us. You know, I think that yearning, like you said, in your group that's alive. Most people I know have a yearning for community, have a yearning for tribe, have a yearning for village style raising of children. Like it's a real thing. And that yearning, similarly like the yearning for partnership, the yearning for that is something not to be ignored. It's calling us. The word I sometimes like is telos. You know, I like telos. Telos is like the idea that the final form of an oak tree is being called out of an acorn. Telos is the force that's pulling the acorn to become an oak tree. And we have that too. We have a force that's pulling us into our evolved self, to who we could be in this lifetime. And that's pulling through the generations of like who our children could be and who our children's children could be and so on. You know, and it's like what we do in this life matters for the next generation.
Yes, it completely does. It really does feel to me that part of that is us reclaiming that kind of 7 generations back, 7 generations forward way of relating to ourselves, others. Like that's so important. And I think that we are reclaiming that. We need to reclaim it. It feels like it's happening.
Well, and I think, you know, like, some, you know, and I go through my pessimistic moods for sure, but I think that some of the benefits of what we've been through is we've been through a deep individuation process in the human species. And I don't think it's fully complete yet. We haven't done it that well, but we've gone through this process, and because it's still occurring, of attempting to become really like self-identified, differentiated from other, like, how am I uniquely different from other in more and more complex ways? So we've kind of been through that process, and we're still differentiating, but there comes a point where, like you just said, where we've almost done that differentiation process. And then the next process is like, actually now how do we function together from that place? How do we integrate? How do we integrate both differentiation and collective, you know, individuation and collectivism? You know, how do those two coexist at the same time, not in opposition to each other, you know, and like prior generations or prior civilizations have been one or the other.
Yeah. I love that. And I think that is so, that unique, like that's the truth. It's like only from being able to fully inhabit that uniqueness that the true communion, true interdependence becomes available. Otherwise it is just kind of, again, like meshing based on wounds, but it's codependence, because we're not really, neither people are actually who they are, or all people aren't who they are if it's a community. So I so agree.
Well, and something that I made a little note. Sometimes I make notes about articles or pieces that I want to write. And just before this, I made a note. something along the lines of differentiation precedes union. It's actually like if you want a union-based relationship, we actually have to differentiate properly. And part of that is healing our attachment wound. And the reason why, that's so important is if we're an insecurely attached being, it means we didn't differentiate from mother or from caregiver properly. So we actually we haven't probably felt differentiated properly our entire life.
Yes.
And we actually have to fully inhabit ourselves, and then we meet the other in an upright position. We can now move closer and closer to the other without collapsing or falling onto them or into them or losing our identity. The anxious person throws their own identity out the window for the sake of connection. Oh, you're free on Friday. I had other plans, but I'll throw my plans away just to be with you, And the avoidant goes, no way am I sacrificing myself for a relationship. I'm like, which is also a form of codependence, right? It's like, I'm going to run away from this. So,
yes.
So that differentiation is super important. And that happens across multiple categories and domain, including we touched a little bit around some interest in human design. To me, human design is an incredible differentiation tool where it's a map for understanding our own unique individual blueprint, So we can do this in numbers of ways, but just that we experience ourselves as like, oh, I'm a separate, unique, important being with a function and role to play in this universe. And so is everyone else. And my task is to be me and then figure out how being me fits with others. And then if we get really good at that, we all kind of fit together like pieces of puzzle and we create something beautiful.
Yeah. Oh, I got chills when you just said that. Yes. Yeah. So closing the loop, how does this then relate to where we started talking about ecology, talking about the planet? How does how does that provide a different, how does that ultimately lead to that more beautiful world?
Well, again, so we're starting to bring energy away from that. We're starting to orient from a more open-hearted place. If I'm operating from my wounds, my heart is closed. I can't feel others fully. I can't feel my care for the planet. When my wounds start getting taken care of, I feel my own unique function. I feel my own unique purpose. My heart opens more. I feel more care and passion about a more beautiful world. And then we start working together better. And then we go like, what happens if we kind of move beyond this, and this is, this may not even happen in our generation, but I don't care. I'm going to try and plant as many seeds for this as I can. We start, and it'd be amazing to see at least a taste of it. We start moving away from the attempts to be highly independent that we see in the Western culture. And it's a complete pseudo independence. No one is independent. It's like where does your food come from? Where does your, when you flush the toilet, where does that go? No one is independent. You can't live with, the only way you'd be independent is you'd be out in the forest living on your own, so independence is false, right? But we think that we're independent, but we're actually unconsciously dependent on others. We don't know who we're dependent on, right? But when we start moving into these directions and considering how we work together, we have the potential, in my mind, to start becoming collectively dependent or consciously dependent, which is interdependence, right? I know I need you and I consciously choose. I know I need someone to have this relationship with, and I consciously choose you because we're here in this relationship. And then we actually provide and support each other's needs, and we can move this to the land, or we can move this into all different kinds of ways. And then we're actually able to support each other. And I think part of this, and Charles Eisenstein talks about this as well, when we move to gift-based economies, is we actually start to share resources, and there are places in different parts of the world where you have shared tool sheds and, you shared vehicles or shared children's toys or things like that. And I actually think we'll start to share wealth at some point. You'll start to share wealth with your close community, your tribe. What would happen, when you get together in a partnership, one-on-one, and you start pooling your resources together, all of a sudden you have a lot more resources potentially. What happens if you get together with 6 other couples and you all start pooling your resources and you're all kind of it's like, oh, wow, suddenly you have a lot of abundance, right?
Yeah.
And so that, I think that's kind of and we start creating organismic units versus just the couple or the partnering. We actually create an organismic unit of however many people working together for our own interdependent well-being. My thriving depends on the health of the organism that I'm part of. So it's no longer about just me. It's like, I have to take care of the organism that I exist inside of. When that thrives, I thrive. So I have this relationship with that. So that's kind of like a far out projection of what could be possible as we start to do this kind of meaningful work.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. I love that so much. And I'm naturally very rose tinted and optimistic, but that feels totally possible to me.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. I do feel that's the oak tree we're being pulled to become.
Me too.
Yeah. And you touched on this, but it feels important to my heart. And I know it is to yours because of the background, because of your background, sorry. I really see that is just how we then relate to ourselves as that kind of organism of humans. Just naturally becomes so clear how that's also everything around us, particularly the land. I mean, so much of my own journey, my own work is that even connection makes it sound like there's some separation in order for it to be a connection, but it's often the only word that makes sense. But like that deep, deep connection with the land around me, the beings around me that aren't just human beings, it feels as though that just, again, naturally happens. It becomes impossible for that not to arise, is the way I'm experiencing it. I'd love to know your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think so as well. I just had a thought then when you were talking about that. It's like, just like we can have insecure attachment with partners, like, we have insecure attachment, which causes a impairment in our ability to bond with other. I think we also have an insecure attachment with the ecology, with the ecosystem, with the natural world. We don't know how to bond with it properly. We don't know how to commune with it. We've been ruptured from it. We were never modeled a deep connection or a deep reverent connection to the land that we live in. And so we don't have that. And most people don't have that, and it's actually a process. So again, one of the things it's almost like layers of importance. When we heal that importance of like, oh my God, romance and love and partnering is like sucking all of my attention, you kind of heal that and you go, oh, I have this. The next natural step is like wanting to heal my relationship with the ecology, wanting to heal my relationship with the natural world, and there's layers of this too. One layer is like just deep appreciation, deep communing with the land, being out and being immersed and being moved by the landscape. And then a deeper layer is like recognizing that I can partner with the land, that it can support for my needs and I can support for like I do with another being. I partner with my romantic partner and we support each other's needs for certain things. The land and the ecology does the same thing. It's a living organism, and it has needs from me as much as I have needs from it. And we can actually support each other. And I'm fascinated by permaculture, and syntropic farming I don't know if you ever heard of that. That's an incredible way of understanding how to partner with the land in a way that is mutually beneficial, mutual thriving, that we're both thriving. And I think that that's, again, this kind of future step, that we're going to have a deeper and deeper bonded connection with our ecology. And then obviously, once we start doing that as well, then we start opening ourselves. One of my teachers calls it our wild cosmos. And our wild cosmos is like, actually, this cosmos is teeming with life, like interdimensional beings and extraterrestrial beings and fairy beings and, all kinds of sentience, and we actually naturally want to start opening ourselves to commune with that too. And so we start to have this more open ability to interact with the fullness of this mystical, magical, unknown experience of existence.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Love that so much. I've got to share this with you because it was suddenly so like, oh, of course. My last shamanic initiation a few weeks ago was being buried underground overnight. And the experience really was...
You were buried underground overnight?
Yes.
Wow.
Quite some initiation. The experience was so profoundly what you've just described as that kind of that broken attachment we have with the earth. The experience I had was that being like healed at a level I didn't even know was possible. Just, it was like having such a deep sense of attachment to the earth being so held, being so in her womb, that something just shifted for me on like such a deep embodied level, where it's like, oh, now I know what that is. That's allowed me then to kind of come back out and know myself as kind of like both are possible. It was like, no other initiation I've ever experienced, like the depth, the profundity. And what you were just saying then about that attachment with the earth, I was just like, oh, of course. Yeah. Just as that with our birth mothers, the same with Mother Earth.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Wow, what an incredible experience. And I can feel that, like when you're talking about it, I can feel in me that like, it's like, my experience of healing my attachment wounds, right, is that my heart feels open. My heart opens up. My heart opens up to my partner. I feel soft. My chest literally feels soft. My nervous system feels more relaxed. I feel more open and receptive, Love is able to flow in and out of me more freely. And I can hear what you're describing. It's the same thing when we connect with Mother Earth. It's like our heart opens in a different dimension. There's a dimension of intimacy, of human to human intimacy, right? And the dimension of that heart opens, but there's also a dimension of intimacy that we share with ecology, and that heart is able to open. We're able to be receptive and be like mutually penetrated with the earth. It's like we're able to receive from the mother as well as like be with it. I can feel what you're talking about in that way.
Yeah. So we're almost up on time. It's actually 11:11 here, so very magical. No, it's not down there. What haven't I asked that you wish I had?
I mean, I guess because we're heading towards the end of the show, and and it feels like an obvious question, but there's also like I feel the deeper impulse inside of me to share about it, and it would have been like, well, like, what do you do, or how do you do that? What are you up to in order that facilitates that? So, I can carry on if you're okay with me.
Let's pretend I asked that very good question.
Yeah. So, like, I mean, I've been playing around with different meta models. I love creating models, and I have a lot of frameworks that I operate from, and I love creating my own. And I've created a few different meta models for how we might relate evolutionarily with our ecology or with our community or intimacy. And one of the key pieces, and where I actually kind of, again, leverage points, right? I'm revealing my strategic orientation. There's some part of me that is strategic, right? And I have an agenda or a vision for what we've just been talking about. Like, that's what I want to see actualize in the world. I want to live in that. I don't need any credit. I want to live in that. That's the world I want to be inside of. So I have this like burning impulse to how can I help make that happen, and there's leverage points. And like I said, one of the leverage points was to focus on intimate relationship, because it's like, oh, this is actually, if we don't handle this, not much is, you can be socially an environmental activist forever, but if you're still insecurely attached and your relationship's full of drama, you're going to be an angry environmental activist, right? You're not going to be a loving, open-hearted one. So,
which I must say is probably this is a stereotype, but I would say that is, and again, it's so well-intentioned, but that fear, that kind of against, it seems like it is the energy animating a lot of activism.
Yeah, it can often orient from an anger or a feeling unseen or uncared for, and kind of a resistance to that, which makes sense, like it makes sense. So, so that's one leverage point, and then the leverage point that I've really started, the work that I'm doing, and the work that I'm doing is expanding, but this is really kind of the foundational point, the fundamental point, is around authentic relating. And authentic relating is the first course that I really started teaching, and I've started working with other models of attachment and polarity, and I've recently been teaching human design, and I kind of like go on tangents around where my own fascination is, but this is like really the keystone of all of this work, and why it's called evolutionary relating. That's the work that I do, is because I actually think that our ability to relate to each other is the pivotal point. Our ability to relate consciously or with an evolutionary framework, full stop. Our ability to relate to each other, our ability to relate to the ecology, right? Our ability to relate to an intimate partner. It's all about how we relate. So I've coined a term, maybe someone else has coined it before, but I really love the term relational intelligence. And that's really what I try and teach is like, how do we increase the intelligence of our relating? And our relating as a verb rather than a noun, relating as a process rather than the container. So how do I relate to you in a way that enables you to become more vividly, vibrantly, uniquely yourself? And how do I relate myself into the world? And then how do we from there, and this is where the work that I'm doing and the more advanced stuff that I teach, we start to lead into, how do we then create more of this organismic consciousness? How do we create collective mind spaces? How do we create spaces where I'm not fully alone? I'm not in this kind of separate self that only can touch another through like, oh my God, I'm in love, or through, love making or sex, that we can actually start to touch each other and have shared communal, spiritual, mystical experiences where we're actually in the same kind of, we're in it together. So that's really what I'm up to with this stuff and what I'm really passionate about, and kind of the leverage point that I'm focused on, the fulcrum that I'm trying to press on.
Oh, I love all of that. Thank you so much. So where can listeners go find out about all of that good stuff?
Well, I would really love, you can follow me on Instagram at Evo Relating, or Facebook, Damien Bohler. My Facebook page doesn't get that much attention. I'm inconsistent on social media because hashtag manifester, I just follow follow my impulses and urges. I have a team forming around me. We're still in reasonably early stages, and there's going to be consistency emerging as that kind of comes into play. And so all of those places are great. But where I would really love people, if they really want to feel close to the work and really get close to me and the work, to sign up to my mailing list on evolutionaryrelating.org. If you go there, there's a place to sign up to the mailing list. And I've just started a mailing list called Love Letters from Damien. And I'm starting to share this framework, but from a really personal place. And there's other announcements soon. I have my own social media app that I've been working on behind the scenes. It's off a white label one, but I really desire to create a community of people who are oriented around evolutionary processes. So people who want to be really in this dialogue, kind of in this activation towards what we've just been talking about. I'd love to have you come and follow along. And there's a bunch of different courses. I have fundamentals of authentic relating. I have courses on nervous system regulation and boundaries, and courses on developing secure attachment coming later in the year. So, yeah.
Oh, amazing. Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Damien. I'm going to say already, I know that I'd love you to have you back for a follow-up episode. Wonderful. I feel like there is just so many places we could take this into another episode, at least one more episode. So for now, thank you so much. That really was a pleasure.
It definitely was a pleasure too. It was really, and I really loved hearing a couple of your experiences. They really touched me, and I felt inspired, both the death process and the community that you've created around your children. I'm just like, all right, awesome. Feeling so good about that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. What a show. I really love that Damien's work with intimacy stemmed from his deepest passion of ecology. That's such a perfect example of how our natural gifts, in this case, Damien's brilliance and his systems thinking, can be used for the highest good. The notion of telos is one that I believe we begin to experience for ourselves once we devote to living from soul. It becomes the North Star that then guides us from acorn to oak. When we heal our childhood attachment wounds, we become available to create partnerships as the column that true community can form around. And then that opens us up to connection with everything. If you'd like to get the notes and links for everything we spoke about this week, hop on over to the show notes, and they're at primalhappiness.co/episode 368. And if you don't want to miss out on next week's episode, head on over to Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or your app of choice and hit that subscribe button. That way you'll get each episode auto magically straight to your device as soon as it's released. Thank you so much for listening. You've been wonderful. Catch you again next week.